All right, so I think we're gonna kick things off here. For people that are coming in, my name is Sachin Kamdar. I'm the CEO co-founder at Elvex, and I have an amazing group of people here with me today. We have Shannon, who's on the Elvex team. She's gonna be helping out, kind of navigating all things webinar. We'll get to kind of details around housekeeping, how to ask questions, things like that in a second. So she's going to be helping out on that front. She'll be off video for most of this, but Shannon, do you want to say hi really quick?
Hi guys, nice to meet you.
And then we have Madeline and Miles at Embark. They are one of our customers at Elvex. They are the experts here. That they're the people that are going to be talking the most during this webinar and giving you guys all the tips, traps, misconceptions, and ways to run amazing AI steering committees. Before we get started, just on the housekeeping side, this webinar will be recorded. We encourage you to stay the whole time because you can ask questions and we'll respond to that. But if you need to leave early, we will send this out afterwards. So you'll have ample time to kind of review everything that's being said here today. If you do have questions, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a little Q&A button. That is how we're going to field questions. We're going to save a good kind of like 10 to 15 minutes at the very end of the webinar to answer questions. So those will be saved until the end. Feel free to ask them in the Q&A chat at any time though, and we'll field those. Shannon will help field those over to us to ask the group here around. And I think that's it. So with that, let's get started. And we're going to get right into it. We're going to go straight to the questions. This will give Miles and Madeline a chance to kind of introduce themselves and also answer a key question here. So Miles, for you, after you introduce yourself, the question that I want you to ask is, you not only work on the steering committee at Embark, but you actually consult on helping other companies handle, organize, architect steering committees. So just at the highest level, after you introduce yourself, give us a sense of like what you're seeing in the space, what trends or misconceptions you see with AI steering committees right now.
Yeah, thanks, Sachin. So Miles Collins here, Senior Director with Embark, and I'm also our Gen AI Service Leader. And I've been at Embark for 2.5 years. I've been working with technology across different layers in the stack and guiding clients through transformation projects for the last 12 in both industry and consulting roles. And in my role at Embark, I primarily focus on our client needs and helping serve as a solution architect using AI. I've stood up and sat on a lot of steering committees and worked alongside Mads on our internal efforts, as Shasheen mentioned. Common characteristics that I see that are really important to account for is one, make sure you have executive support. This is not a transformation that you can do without your top being bought in and helping lead and push for that change. You also need to make sure that you've got the right people involved. So having a highly cross-functional group that's represented on the steering committee is critical. And that's going to include people not just from IT, although they are important here, but you really want to make sure that you've got people across all business units, including your operations, accounting, legal, et cetera. Some of the common misconceptions, though, is a lot of people think that these are IT driven. The AI change is really not as much AI driven or IT driven as it is operations and understanding the business processes and where we can improve and make those more efficient. And so I think that's a really important one to clear up.
Thank you, Miles. And we're going to dive into all that stuff shortly. Matt, so you had to work on setting up, steering, and also just enabling the whole company with AI at Embark. Introduce yourself to the group here, but then tell me about kind of like what are the key ways that you did that for Embark with the steering committee, and then maybe some key learnings that you had along that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Madeline Garcia. My friends here call me Mads. I'm the Chief of Staff to the COO here at Embark. I've been here for almost 3 years, gone by very quickly, especially at a high growth company. I started my career in audit advisory and audit at a PwC before moving into industry, where I was exposed to financial system development, IT projects for a ton of different sectors. Now I primarily work within Embark in our office of COO, including IT, and working to just make sure everything here runs smoothly. So when Elvex kind of came up, it's something I jumped on, and it's been really fun working with. To get Elvex started within Embark, there's a very big difference between having a steering committee that is for a required implementation, like an ERP that everybody's forced to use, versus something that's a tool for efficiency optimization, right? That's more of an optional add-in. So keeping that in mind for LVEX and bringing in kind of AI, the first thing we wanted to do was identify the different areas that could truly benefit from the start, right? Finding those early adopters, finding those small wins, getting people involved who are really passionate about it. So that way we could build that energy within the company. So of course we have our COO, who is a great tone at the top with energy and innovation, which truly speaks to Embark in general. Our company is made up of high performance, high achievers who want to know what's the next thing coming out to make our lives better, to make our clients' lives better. So it was actually very easy for us to kind of spur that energy, especially with the tone at the top that was very strategic in that. From there, of course, we had to get our IT folks involved to make sure that we could implement correctly within Slack for a Slack company. And then also, of course, risk and compliance, which is, of course, we want to be, focused on our data handling, data privacy. But from there, truly, it was just kind of a lot of word of mouth, identifying those internal teams who could truly benefit, like I said, from the start, and then moving forward. I would say from the start, after identifying those department leaders, this is my take. I would rather have a non-tech savvy person who's passionate about it versus someone who's very technical, like Miles said. Someone who understands the operations and sees the value of this automation, of this optimization. So from there, we really just empowered our champions and let them go and explore. And if you've ever worked on an implementation with me, I always tend to say, try and break it, because I want people to explore this technology and be super excited about it.
Amazing. Thank you. And we're going to dive into that in a little bit. But first, I want to get into like an area that I think crosses a lot of minds when there are steering committees or thinking about standing up steering committees with really around the kind of like fear of AI. There's a lot of perceived fear, maybe perceived risk about job replacement, about how this is going to impact individuals' work, how much change is going to be involved. And so when you're working with your steering committee and then pushing down to the rest of the organization, and this question is for both of you, how do you kind of deal with that perception? How do you match that with reality of what this technology can do for the organization? And then how does that get kind of resolved in the steering committee?
Yeah, so Sheen, the biggest thing there is just facing the myth that's kind of lurking around, and that's AI really is replacing jobs already, and we're not quite there yet. It's definitely enhancing people's jobs when it's done right, but it's not outright just completely replacing teams at this point in time. And I think we're still years away from that. So I think it's really easy and important for the steering committee to go ahead and get ahead of that in their communications with the teams and just help them understand what the objective and the outcomes are intended to be from the project, and help people understand the difference between what their processes and their teams look like today versus what they're hoping they should look like tomorrow. And by getting ahead of that and helping people understand that the intention really is to take some of the mundane and manual or non-value add type tasks off of their plate and give them more time back to focus on those complex and important things that they enjoy doing, you start to get buy-in early on. And if you are going to,
and just on that really
yeah.
quick, Miles. So how does that happen? Is that something where it's like top down, like the COO, CEO, somebody else, CTO, CIO is saying something to the org, or is that happening with like, bottom up people using it in a certain way? How does that actually work through the organization?
It needs to happen both directions. You need the people that are going to be on the steering committee that are highly ingrained in the business processes. Like what Mads was mentioning is having the people that know their part of the business intimately and are leaning into AI. Those are going to be the bridges, the human bridges to understand what that transformation might look like. And those are going to be the people that can start to illustrate in detail out to the teams what those changes look like. and then having your top down reiterate that this change is meant to improve their lives to bring that efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of communication here, almost every, couple weeks of what's new, what's coming out and what's available. And we really try to emphasize that having these tasks, these mundane tasks, not be on your plate anymore. It gives you space to upskill. It gives you space to explore other ways to add value within your team, since you're not doing something so manual that otherwise you wouldn't have opportunity to do.
Can we get into the details around communication? So what does that look like? How are you communicating with the org? Is that like videos, webinars? Like what is the way that all this stuff is getting realized?
Absolutely. And something, and then just kind of going to my experience of jumping into this role at Embark, I've realized that, with our 600 plus folks, everybody does learn and communicate very differently. So it's really important for me to structure these communications to kind of enhance, those who like to read, those who like to watch, those who like to reference later. And so we do cover all of those different ways to communicate information. And we do that pretty frequently, especially when it comes to milestones, our overall goal, our higher strategy, and then also those small takeaways that everybody can do regardless of level, involvement, whatever it might be. So like I said, we are a Slack company. So within each message, it does provide each of those different ways to ingest that information, whether it might be a video, like I said, or an article they could read and reference later.
Thank you. So let's get around like the formation of a steering committee. Maybe Miles, you can start with this one, and then Matt, you can take it next. How do you create them? Like what happens at the foundational stage around a steering committee? Who is creating them? Who gets involved? How does it get resolved? And how do you kind of initially stand it up?
Yeah, the initial inception of it really needs to be driven by what your business goals or objectives are with AI. So having a general understanding of what you're trying to get out of it. From there, you need to make sure that you've got that executive buy-in and involvement. It's critical that you've got people at the very top that are staying plugged in and understanding kind of where we are in the journey and helping work through the decision-making process that's going to be required throughout that project. With those executives, then you want to sit down and start thinking through, where do we have champions? How do we even define an AI champion? And making sure that we have some of those on the committee that can help us push this out, get people excited about it. And then also
What are
identifying,
sorry to interrupt, but what are some common
yeah,
definitions you've seen of AI champions?
common characteristics for a champion: one, being tech savvy, being a great communicator, and having strong relationships throughout the company. I'd say are the top three things.
I would
And
add also that passion for what's new. Like I said, it could be tech savvy, it could be operationally savvy, or actually one of my favorite champions that we have right now is someone that everybody actually perceives as the least technical person, but they're so excited about how, these tools are going to bring so much more time to their day. So they're actually a great advocate for it, because everybody's like, oh wait, if they get this and they love it, I want to jump on board too. So I think it's definitely a mix between, the operationally savvy, the tech savvy, and then those just who are excited out of the blue.
And how do you source those for both of you guys? Is that just, like you're asking people to raise their hand, or is there a way that you're like able to find those, diamonds in the rough?
Mads, I'll
Everyone.
let you answer that
Okay.
first.
Yeah, so I think, Miles is working more on the client facing side while I'm working more on the internal, but I think working together to first solicit within our different practices, within our teams, who is already using an AI tool, who is already using something before we even consolidate into an Embark, sponsored platform. And really just asking those questions, like, what are you doing now? And how can we potentially use this within an organized manner? And just getting those use cases out and trying to understand, find those quick wins, and really actually highlighting those folks who are using it. So that's one way we really just know the people here at Embark very well. And like I said, Embark is full of very innovative, high energy folks. That's why we all work here. So that wasn't super hard to find. And then from my perspective too, it's just meeting with smaller teams and being like, hey, have you heard of this? Have you tried this? And just bringing it into that everyday conversation. Like I said, between the two of us, we reach the mass majority of pretty much everybody at Embark, whether it's client facing or internal. So we were able to quickly kind of spread that word and get that feedback.
And Miles, on the
Yeah.
client facing side, I think Shannon, you might have your video on. I'm gonna stop it in a second. Yep. Miles, on the client facing side, you have to deal with clients that might have a healthy dose of skepticism or cynicism with AI and its potential value. Are those companies that still stand up steering committees? Like, how are you kind of architecting your practice on the client side in and around that space when you meet with people that are just like, yeah, I don't know about this technology?
Yeah. Yeah, the most important thing, I mean, we definitely still stand up the steering committee because they're invaluable to be able to collectively look at where are we making progress against what we said we would do. What are some of the blockers that we need to solution for? And then what are some wins that we've had that we can really rally around and get people excited about? So the steering committees, even in the world of AI, still prove phenomenal value. And I think just in that, like what I was just describing is kind of the answer to working through the skepticism within the org. Assuming that we have gotten to the point where we're standing up, an AI steering committee says that we've got the executive support, we have the funding, we have the goals. People, at least the right people, the right leaders say, let's go explore this, let's lean into it. And then from there, you figure out who are the skeptics and how do we win them over, and kind of iteratively work through those different groups of people.
Amazing. Can we talk around like budgeting? How does that happen with the steering committee? And for new technologies like AI, where they have broad applicability, how does that get kind of line itemed, or how does that get budgeted for an organization?
Yep. It's a great question. And generally, it's going to depend on what it is that we're setting out to solve for, the use case. And in all implementations of AI, regardless of what kind of AI, what kind of technology we're actually going to implement, what's most important to start with is your top use cases and understanding where we're going to see some type of large return or expecting to see. Because that's going to make sure that we're focusing on deploying capital dollars to the right place. And so when we start working at it from that angle, then it helps us figure out, one, who's funding it. Are we moving into one specific area of the business that's going to fund this, or is this really meant to be enterprise wide? And it's a line item in just the company's general CapEx budget that says, hey, we're going to go invest in a tool like LVEX that is meant to really be deployed across the enterprise, and then we're going to onboard each business unit kind of iteratively as we roll through. So budget wise, it kind of depends on what we're solving for. But the process where we define how much budget we need is iteratively happens while we're defining those use cases. We'll work through and help clients understand, based on what you're trying to do, here's generally what kind of solutions we might recommend, whether we need to build something custom and it's going to be maybe a more expensive or a longer running project, or if there's some great off the shelf solutions that we can implement for less money and then less time.
Follow up to that, just with the individuals that are involved in the steering committee, and when you deal with budgets, sometimes you can get into like politics around this stuff. And especially with a technology like this, where a lot of different people want to own the technology, how does that get navigated in the steering committee? Like, what are good ways to make sure that that stays out of the steering committee and you focus on kind of the successful outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a tricky answer because it really depends on the personalities at play. What we've seen so far is that people are just generally excited about this stuff, and no one wants to necessarily own it outright. I think most people understand that this is collaborative. I'd say IT just historically wants to own these types of solutions. They want to have a heavy role in selecting and implementing and supporting them, and rightfully so. But it is really important to make sure that the business has a very strong seat at the head of the table that's really driving this, and clearly defining the roles in terms of what ownership really means. Is that you own the support, or are you owning the business results, and breaking that down.
Cool. Mads, on your side, can you walk us through success stories that you've had with the steering committee at Embark?
Yeah, I mean, goodness. Our steering committee has changed a little bit as we've implemented this project because, as I mentioned in the beginning, is this a required tool? Is this something that is an opt-in optional? And of course, that brings in different personalities and folks who are super excited about it, who see that end value, right? Or they have time to explore these tools. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, we do have a lot of different champions who were unexpected and very eager to start creating custom apps using LVEX to make their day-to-day a lot more efficient. And that has now brought them into more of this steering committee discussion to get those items out into Embark. A couple other ones, I mean, gosh, we have so many users who are in there now that I can't even keep track. You know, thank goodness we have good access provisioning and single sign and all this stuff, but we have so many incoming ideas and brainstorming of ways to create these custom
Well,
apps.
let's actually walk through that because I think that's important
Yeah,
for the attendees here. Like,
yeah.
when you think about access and provisioning, you think about like who's going to be allowed to do what. What did that look like when you were kind of conceptualizing that for Embark, and then how did that actually play out?
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody from Embark is watching this too, they know that I am a hound for IT provisioning, IT access, IT audit. So for me, you know, as we're building these apps and everything, we want to be really cognizant of the data sources. You know, bad data gives you bad results. It doesn't matter what awesome tool you have on place, right? So for me, it was really important to lock down data sources from being public. You know, if you trust it for yourself and this is a private use, you know, for example, I use an app that does actually a lot of my Slack channel communications for me. I have those private, you know, what's Mad's voice, tone, expectations, emojis she likes to use, whatever, that doesn't need to be public, right? So really kind of going through with our risk compliance and data handling and data sensitivity was really important to make sure that we do have policies and procedures in place before we opened it up for all of the Embark enthusiasts to jump in and get their hands dirty, which we do and we love and we want to empower that. So that was really important for me. And I know, Sasheen, you've gone back and forth and helped us get there, which was really helpful as well. So knowing before you can let loose, you have to make sure you know their restraints, especially with Miles and team working with clients as well. We have to be really cognizant of what contracts are in place, what allowances for our folks to be using AI, what are the restraints in terms of PII, PHI, all that good stuff. So that was definitely something that I worked really closely with our risk manager to get that comfort before now we can kind of go and have fun and get creative.
And I know Miles and Mads, you both thought of the idea of having like an like an application process for people that wanted to create apps like that. Never seen another company do that with this type of technology. I thought that was a really cool idea. Can you talk through that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So we used, you know, an IT support type of system within our company. And part of that is, hey, you know, phase one for our rollout was get used to just using the different LLMs, just using it as a homepage, you know, asking it to do more of those mundane things without having a custom app. So people got used to it and started getting those creative ideas. And once they're ready, they request app creator access. And part of that process is actually going through acknowledging that policy and procedure about data handling, data sensitivity, understanding that, you know, client data is not allowed unless discussed and explicitly stated within any contracts we have, things like that, and making sure that they really understand and acknowledge and respect those policies before we grant that creator access. On top of that, we've had a lot of video tutorials that Shannon has been so amazing in helping us create and helping with this rollout. To make sure that people understand these different settings and expectations. So once they submit, they acknowledge, I kind of go through and just make sure they don't have any questions. They understand what those policies and procedures mean and how we will be monitoring it. And then, yeah, they're free to go and have fun and get creative. So we are, as much of a fun, high growth and kind of business casual place we do take our compliance and security, very seriously. We wanted to make sure that was addressed at the beginning, so that way we could relax and have fun now.
Amazing. Okay, Miles, I can't ask Mads this question, but I can ask you this question. What does a failed or ineffective steering committee look like?
An effective steering committee, I'd say the most important thing is having really clearly defined objectives and some metrics to work off of. It's going to be important to have control, have visibility, and be able to measure what you're implementing and then what the results are. And where we're trying to provide efficiencies back to teams, we need a way to measure that. We need a way to understand if the time and the money that we're spending is making a difference or moving the needle. And I'd say that's probably the biggest, most important thing when it comes to defining a successful steering committee, is being able to manage and measure that. Obviously, the results are important. I don't want to skip past that. Actually implementing the technology and meeting the objectives that the steering committee set out. And if you've got those clearly laid out, you've got a good plan defined, and you're actually meeting those metrics, I would say that that's a successful steering committee. They've done their job.
And so I would say like probably the opposite of that. So if you're not clearly defining your outcomes or results from that, that's like setting yourself up for failure. Have you dealt with steering committees where that is success, like the foundation has been successful? So very clear that you have the right stakeholders, you have the right outcomes that have been defined, but then for some reason it doesn't work. Like, have you experienced that? What has been the reason that maybe it didn't progress to the next stage?
Yeah, we definitely see that from time to time where folks just don't really have their eye on the ball per se. They're kind of just whittling away, and it becomes a really big playground more than a big project. And in those instances, yeah, you definitely need to kind of hit reset and figure out what's going awry. Do we have the wrong people on here? Do we maybe have someone who's not really in it to win it as far as implementing this? Do we maybe have lack of visibility or control over where we're making progress? And so that's where, doing some really strong planning on the onset of this is pretty important.
We're just about getting to QA, but this is the question that was just asked here is relevant to the topic at hand. So I'm going to ask it to you guys directly, which is, how do you handle someone on the steering committee who's only interested in slowing things down, blocking work, critiquing? What needs to happen in kind of that scenario?
Yeah, the human blockades will continue to exist, especially with the new technologies as they come out. Typically, it's a personality thing. Humans are natural skeptics, and it's honestly good to have that representation on the committee. You want balance. You don't want the eternal optimists running everything, because they're going to miss certain things. But having those relationships and being able to spend time understanding their concerns, their worries, and getting to the root of their critiques is really important. They're probably coming at it from a great place. They probably have really positive intentions, and knowing that and assuming that gives you the headspace to be able to sit down and maybe work through their concerns. Maybe there's something that the project hasn't considered yet that is concerning them. Maybe the objectives are too aggressive from their perspective. And so as you sit down and have those conversations, you can figure out, what do we need to adjust to find that center?
Has there been scenarios where it's like a third party like Embark is pulled into that to like help navigate maybe a steering committee that might be a little more dysfunctional than functional?
Yeah, we've definitely seen it. And what happens is sometimes you have people that just don't want to adopt it. The change is something that they just don't want to lean into. And so where I spoke before about people having concerns that are very valid and very good intentions, you sometimes also have the folks that really don't have the best of intentions. They just don't want change. And we've helped kind of be part of those conversations before to the extent that we can. But when you have someone who is extremely um, conflicting, if you will, about the change, at some point, the client, the leadership team just has to sit down and have a hard conversation with that individual. And so I'd say first figure out, is this someone who just has good intentions, wants to make sure that we're thinking through everything, or is this someone who really just does not want change?
Mads, for you, another question was, how do you balance the effort of like planning? Actually, this is for you too, Miles, around like planning what you want to do with this technology versus actually, boots on the ground, experimentation, getting results out of it.
Yeah, I think for our initial rollout, we were focused on getting the technology into the hands of the folks who had those creative ideas. And so our planning was structured on how are we introducing the technology? What are like, 2 or 3 milestone wins that we can look forward to and have those easily communicated. In that time in between, that's where the experimenting happens. We're working within these milestones, these guidelines, and we're giving time and empowering those folks who loved the first milestone and are excited about getting ready for the second one. And that's when we're really giving that time to say, okay, cool, milestone 1 complete off the planning chart. Let's go experiment as we get ready for the second rollout to come out. So
Yeah.
keeping it guidelines of proper milestones, but also making sure we have time for our folks who have those creative ideas to get empowered and have fun.
Yeah, what I was going to say, like, not to put words in your mouth, but what I really loved working with the Embark team on is that you guys don't think about planning and experimenting as a serial process. Like, you don't have to do one and then the other. You can do both together and like change the way that you're thinking about this over time, which I think is right when you're dealing with new technology here. The best way to plan is to understand how it's working inside your org, and that means experimenting and understanding where there's those early adopters, where there's those quick wins, and that can kind of change the way that your plan is. Because your plan can be dynamic. It doesn't have to be like, here's our plan. Now let's go do this step by step by step by step.
Absolutely. And the last thing that I wanted to do was to put out a spark of somebody's interest, right? If we were too structured to say phase 1, absolutely no one can create an app or do anything until phase 2 comes out 6 to 8 weeks later, people will get excited and then maybe fall off and forget, right? So especially with these tools that we want folks to opt in, to get creative, to start thinking about how to use it in their day-to-day, you need that flexibility. You need that dynamic, path within that rollout.
Let's get to some kind of like details around a steering committee. And maybe Miles, you can take this, and Mads, you can add on as you see fit. But just like how many people should be in a steering committee? How often should they meet? Like who is holding the steering committee accountable? Things like that. What are like just the specifics, bullet points around some of the things you're seeing in the space, Miles?
Yeah, number of people kind of depends on the size of the org, just because you want the representation from different areas of the business. You also don't want it to be too big. At some point it just becomes a club, and everyone who's doing the work and thinking about this is like, it's just the same group meeting over and over and calling it something different. So you want to abstract a little bit of the day-to-day detail from the steering committee, just because you want them to have the opportunity to sit down and think a little more strategically. As far as numbers go, I'd say no more than 10 people is going to be pretty important to keep that group under that number. But you need at least enough representation to make sure that you're getting good perspectives, that you've got the pushback, that you're not just creating wishful things. As far as representation, to make it successful, you need a strong program manager that's going to run it and make sure that that person has the background and the experience of managing multiple work streams, multiple projects, working with strong personalities. And that person is really going to be the person that sits down before and after each time your steering committee gets together and make sure that we know exactly how well we're doing against what we're working towards, and being able to report that back out to the business.
What are the typical titles that you see for that role?
I would say a program manager. If you just bring in a program manager to really focus on this, I saw a question in the chat around like time allocation with the steering committees, and most people don't actually have the luxury, unless you are on the actual project team, to get relief from your day job. So I think most people on the steering committee are going to have their day job and spend time on the side in their free time providing guidance with the steering committee, but you are going to have some people that are truly dedicated to this. Another important role that you want to see on the steering committee is an AI architect, and that can be someone in-house, or that can be someone externally, like a consultant. And that's someone who can be that bridge between what the business is looking for and the technology. Someone who can speak to the solutions that are on the market and explain what's viable or how we might get there.
Great, thank you. Mads, anything to add to that? And then I'll just remind everybody that Q&A is open, so if you have questions, feel free to ask. We already have several in there that we're going to get to.
No, I mean, I think Miles did a great job. It really depends on the company, the personalities within the company. It always starts at that tone at the top of the sponsor to really drive the buy-in and the passion and the accountability within the committee. We went through a lot of different steering committee iterations within Embark for AI. It started at kind of a AI cohort or a AI enthusiast group or things like that. That kind of just turned into, hey, let's get representation from all of the internal departments. Let's make sure we have Miles to help bring in the perspective for external client offerings. And it kind of naturally went from a AI tool enthusiast cohort into something that was a little bit more formal. So that way we could put milestones and have a little bit more of a plan to execute on. So again, we're a hyper growth company, and when we like to move really quickly, and that just kind of worked naturally with how we operate. But depending on the company, depending on, public, private, a lot of folks, 10 people in a company, it's definitely going to vary.
Cool. Okay, we have a few questions here. Actually, one that I want to make sure that I get to, and then I'll get to some of the ones in the attendees here, is when should you close your steering committee? When is a steering committee done in this kind of era of AI? Or is it never done? Or are we like sticking with it for the long term?
Yeah, it's probably never done, to be honest, unless you are planning to stop innovating. If you want to set a goal and implement some tool and never grow with that tool, or deploy that tool to other people in the business, or find new use cases for it, then you could probably close it down, but you'd be leaving money on the table at that point. You'd be losing out and gaining the additional value. So I think the AI steering committee, or whatever it evolves into in terms of its name, eventually it's just a function within the business, because I'd say AI is the same way that we saw back in the 90s, where everyone started getting personal computers. I mean, imagine where our lives are now versus what they were in the early 80s. And so at some point it just becomes status quo, and we need to have people that are consistently looking at moderating, managing, and implementing AI. And I think that's going to look like a lot of full-time jobs at some point.
Awesome. So we have a question here. What are the most useful things the president CEO should do to set the tone and expectations? I'm assuming this means for the AI steering committee. And we also had another one, maybe we can take this as homework for us, around the name steering committee sounding bureaucratic or from the 80s. Maybe we need a new name for that.
AI enthusiast cohort we started with.
Okay, there we go. AI enthusiast cohort. I love that. But yeah, for both of you, like, what are leaders, I guess, in general, what are the most useful things they can do to set the tone and expectations here?
I think, first of all, enable your people. The idea of finding these champions, these people that are really excited about this new tech and figuring out all the different ways that we can improve our business with it. If you enable those people to go spend time learning more about the tech, and upskilling, if you enable them to bring their ideas forward and you engage and support them in that pursuit, and then also enable them with the people that they need to be successful. So putting together that committee, finding somebody to help manage the actual program, assigning dollars to the budget, helping provide the actual technology. Like that is one of the most important things that you can do as a leader, is to say, hey, we're gonna go pursue adopting this new technology. We're going to do it wisely. We're going to do it cautiously, but we're going to put time and dollars into it. And for people to be able to raise their hand and get involved, that says more than words alone could say about your organization and your intentions of actually adopting it.
Yeah, to add on to that too, I mean, our COO, Joey Lacerdo, he is fantastic about, I think he's just also just loves all this new tech, right? He's taken the opportunity to have, all company-wide communications, videos, what we call fanatical videos and updates of what's new within the company. And anytime you talk to him, he is enthusiastic and passionate about what's next for AI and what's next, right? And so that becomes contagious, because other leaders are like, oh, I see him being excited about it. I want to understand it. I want to make sure that we're all able to move forward together. So I think that, having that leader wanting to go forward with those things and bringing it into their day-to-day interactions and into every conversation, like if you talk to Joey, it's in every conversation, is just, I mean, you have to have it. It makes it so much easier.
I think we have time for maybe one more question here. And this is around kind of AI training and education. Is the committee responsible for it? Is it a third party? Like, how do you just deal with onboarding people and training people with new technology in the AI space?
Yeah, I'll take the first stab, and then Mads, I know you've got a lot of perspective here as well. It's definitely responsible. The committee is definitely responsible, because to understand how much resistance and weariness is still out there, the skeptics, like, you're not going to win those people over unless they feel like they know exactly how to use these new tools in their day-to-day. And you kind of have to walk them through step by step. This is what your role looks like today, but this is exactly what your role is going to look like tomorrow. You have your early adopters, you have your champions, your people that are going to just naturally figure out how this fits into my day-to-day. But that's a small percentage of the larger company. And so figuring out different ways, different mediums, like Mads was mentioning earlier, to actually deliver that training and help people understand, visualize, and see how they're going to use this technology, how they're going to use the applications, and what that means for their day-to-day is absolutely critical. Otherwise, you end up with new technology that you're putting in front of people that they're just not going to use. And that's going to create a new whole host of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to make sure those small first wins are very tangible for end users to see, whether it's an example app, like we posted some of our custom apps today for everybody to use, or it's, video training, or it's a one pager about risk and compliance, like whatever it might be that really help them get through those first kind of speed bumps. I mean, we have a lot of different personalities and learning types to work with. So whatever we can do in different mediums is the best way forward.
Awesome. Well, I think that does it for today. I want to say thank you to Mads and Miles for joining us on this webinar. Just as a reintro, they work for Embark, which is one of the world's fastest growing consultancies. Everybody that I've met at Embark are wonderful people to work with. So if you're curious about Embark, you can go to embarkwithus.com. And I'm Sachin at Elvex, and you can go to elvex.ai if you have questions about us. Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you have a great week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.